Welcome back to module number 2. In this module, we're looking at a checklist for organisations and programs that will improve your engagement of fathers in your community. See Family Worker Training and Development Program to get a copy of the checklist and make sure that you complete it and review what the results are to actually indicate where do you need to go next. It's going to give you lots of good tips and directions. The checklist is actually based on 4 key ideas. The first one is about environment. Men actually know more about safety and the environment around them than we give them credit for. Probably the big difference in my mind between working with men and working with women is that women vocalise their life experience so much more, and it's clearly articulated, it's much more well understood, and people working within the community services and child family organisations, we relate to that. With men, they don't articulate it as much, but they are in tune with their environment and how they perceive that environment just as much. One of the men which I worked with once said, "Andrew, it's not going into the building that's the problem, it's how do you get out if you don't like what's occurring." That men don't want to lose face. There's been often a lot of experiences of shame within men's lives. Again, this stuff is not really spoken about, but it often sits in the background and makes them reluctant to actually engage with new situations unless they can actually value the relevance of it. The environment is really critical for you to consider. What is it that you imagine men would notice when they first walk in your front door? You may actually be doing home visiting where you're actually meeting them on their environment, and many men and women actually express appreciation that our services come to them in that case. But when they actually come into our door, it's important to consider what that perception is. A lot of men communicate that they actually feel that the space is not male friendly. It does not mean that we need to pull down the posters and the actual images that we have much more dearly loved for many years, but it's important to think about the word balance. How do you cater for that balance? What's the reading material which is involved in your waiting room? Having a range of things. The environment is not the be-all and end-all of actually engaging fathers, but it's the starting place. And it's an important one because, for all of us, the environment which we live in is actually the unspoken place where we find safety, security, and also our best responses. The environment is not the be-all and end-all of engaging fathers. It's actually a starting place, and it's an important one because it is actually so influential in men and women's lives, and it's so unspoken in men's lives in how they actually work through if a place is going to be relevant and important and useful for them. Some of those other issues to just think about in terms of the environment is also accessing hours. That's a hard issue due to funding. It's going to have tight demands on it, but try to work at the most flexible way you can around it. Many men may not be actually accessible during the day, but most men actually carry a mobile phone, even in their work context. Consider giving a 5-minute call to the father after you've done a home visit where you have seen the mother. And to routinely do that every few weeks as a way of touching base and informing him about that you actually appreciate and see that he plays a really important role in the support which you're providing his family. Also offer an invitation that you would like to meet him at a suitable time, which actually you can follow up with down the track. One of those things about the environment which is going to work is trying to maximise what I call perceived equality. It's about creating a space which is equally shared. Sometimes some of the best examples of this is not having too formalised waiting areas, but actually using more informal space. We know this works with young people. Many FRCs, family relationship centres, have experimented with it, and it's actually been appreciated by many. Language is another important issue that you need to consider. Language for men, again, tends to be shorter sentences than you may find that you use in women who better articulate their experiences. Language with men is often very active and practical. Language may even be tainted with jokes or with a side reflection. And sometimes that is stuff which may be useful, and sometimes it even may be stuff which needs to be challenged if it trivialises important issues which we have an interest in. One of the important things to consider with language is the word mother respect. If you work in areas that have a high level of family separation, I encourage you to actually use mother respect in your language, and encourage the fathers to use it likewise. When we use the word X, there's a lot of energy that we let out in that breath. And there's a lot of putting down subtly of even the other partner, and it drags the whole discussion into even an adult realm. When you actually encourage, and by just saying, do you mean the mother of your children? And they would probably say, yes, that's what I said, the X. And there's a difference between the X and her being the mother of your children. You're dragging that whole discussion back into child-centred language, and that's a very important aspect of our work. You're going to find that the more that men can stay child-centred and focused, and that is even reflected in their language, they're going to be softer and more purposeful. And you're going to have much more discussions which are going to be of mutual interest to the work which you do and for the purpose and interest which they have for who matters in their life. One of those language issues as well you need to consider is most men are going to find out about your program through word of mouth contact. The challenge of using word of mouth promotion is that in the beginning your numbers are going to be a lot more fragile, and it's important to hang in there until more people in your community, more fathers can experience the benefits of what you provide, and they will be able to tell others. Another aspect is marketing. Marketing is really critical. Most men do not understand the relevance of our service. In fact, the word counselling is often very punitive when it's mentioned in the media. It's often seen as the last resort, and it's often similar to going to the principal's office and having your hand smacked. It's important that we portray and create a very different response where the men can actually understand the usefulness of who we are and what we can provide. The best and often the most opportunistic approach in terms of doing that is to be child-centred, because that is where you're going to get their greater mutual support as well. So I encourage you to think about how can you market in that way. One of those aspects of marketing is that when you're doing general promotion in your community, you're often promoting to the stakeholders or the broader communities around the men's lives. They may not respond to many of the ads and flyers which we create, but often they're the grandparents, their parents. It may be even the partner. It may even be a sibling, brother or sister. They may pick it up and actually personally recommend that the father should actually give this a go. That's actually going to be how many men are going to access your program, because word of mouth is extremely powerful in working with men. It's what they trust is a personal recommendation about the usefulness of something, rather than actually the face value of looking at a flyer or reading about it in the local press. Another aspect of marketing is really to assume interest until proven otherwise. And that's a very important principle. So one of those things which you may do in marketing your service is giving them regular feedback around what you're doing and what is it that you're noticing. Most people are not going to reject you if you actually give them a useful reflection about, wow, I've seen Josh has really changed this week. He's now doing this, which he wasn't doing 2 weeks ago. You know, is this something that, you're noticed? To build his curiosity in what you observe about his family is going to actually get you working alongside. And that's a very critical way of working together. The final point about marketing is, how do you promote your service? For a lot of services, we overuse the word parents or family. And in doing that, it tends to have a subtle code across in our professional communities and even in the general community, it's code for mothers. It's really important to use statements that your program or your group or your work is for mothers, fathers and other important carers in children's lives aged such and such. And I think this is one of the most respectful ways which we can present our services. One, it's actually respectful to the mothers, they are first. Second, it's actually respectful to the fathers because the actual gendered name of fathers or men is present. Thirdly, it's actually important for the grandparents or the other carers and the extended family that in our community often support and have an active interest in the children's lives in which we work. Finally, just a couple of reflections on service provision is another aspect of the checklist. In providing services, not one approach is going to fit all. So it's important to have a variety of approaches, to have a range of approaches and use choice. In terms of working with men and fathers, choices and consequences is a very powerful set of ideas. It's how a lot of men perceive the world and evaluate the world, what their options are, what their challenges are. It's how they do active problem solving and it's how they work through what is their best response in a situation. Use a variety of choices. Even if your program only provides one service, you can actually add greater value to that by saying that you can actually post information out, you can actually give them a call the next week to follow up on anything which they would like to discuss, or they can access your program for whatever the service is that you can provide. In responding in that way, you already have provided 3 choices. And actually, as you provide choices, it allows men to own that experience of how they want to respond to what you provide in that relevant way. For some, they may just actually give it some time and think about it. For others, it may be that they'll take one of those choices, which will then, if they feel that it's been useful, they'll come back and say, hey, I'd really like to come and be part of whatever else which you do. So choices is a very powerful way. Even if they're limited, try to find a range of ways that you can present options which allows them to engage with how they want to be part of your program. Finally, in terms of service provision, the best programs around Australia, in my experience, are programs that are rich in relationship. This is not just true for mothers, we know that's true, but it's equally true for programs with fathers. The best programs have a strong relationship, either where the father warms up to the relationship with his children and he can see the relevant usefulness of support services that they play a role in helping him with his relationship with his children. You move from actually being a threat or something which he's suspicious about to actually being an opportunity. And that's a really powerful change in working with men. That's one of the choices you need to be able to navigate, is how you can actually position your program as an opportunity and not be seen as a threat or an intrusion. Just in summary for this checklist, again, have a go completing it. See what is it that stands out as you reflect on your own program and what you can improve. And look at opportunities where you may be able to fill those gaps. This practice tool is very much about the checklist, which you have been reviewing throughout the video and also throughout the actual documentation you can get from the Family Worker Training and Development Program. Encourage all your team to sit down and complete the checklist, and then to come together at one of your team meetings and discuss what were the results of that completion. What stood out? What were the gaps? What were the strengths? And if there's anything which you have learnt in terms of how you can respond differently to engaging more fathers in your own community.